Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Paul Hedderman. Welcome, Paul. I have a little chat group associated with batgap.com, the blog where I archive all these interviews. And just the other day, someone said, "Hey, you should interview Paul Hedderman." And I said, "Well, it so happens that he's my next scheduled guest." And then several people chimed in and said, "Oh boy, Paul Hedderman, that should be that should be interesting." So you've got a sort of a fan base out there, I guess. And in preparation for this, I've listened to quite a few hours of your podcast talks, and I have several observations. One is you really have a gift for being able to kind of, carry on a sustained dialogue or a sustained talk, for an hour or so without repeating yourself, and you keep it interesting. And so I'm impressed with that. I couldn't do it. And you don't repeat yourself from week to week for the most part. I mean, every one I've heard is something new, so that's pretty cool. Second thing, I sort of have gathered bits and pieces of your story by listening to these, and we'll fill in the gaps. But you mentioned that you often mention that you have an experience with recovery because you had been addicted to cocaine and perhaps other things. So that comes into it. And you mentioned several significant shifts or awakenings. One that happened on an airplane on the way to Australia when you went deeper and deeper and deeper. And you also mentioned something about being in an audience with some teacher, a woman of some, whom I don't know who it was, maybe Gangaji or somebody, and having a big shift. And it's not so much that, these little individual bits of the story are that significant. I mean, most people say it's not my story that counts, it's the sort of reality underlying it. But what I find from hearing, people's feedback from this show is that when they listen to several dozen interviews and each person tells a slightly kind of different, their own kind of life story of what happened to them, they find that they can relate to more and more and more sort of bits and pieces, and they see that awakening doesn't have to show up any particular way. It can be as various as we humans are various, and so they don't get hung up on the notion that, well, this guy almost got hit by a truck and had his awakening, and therefore I should go jumping in front of trucks. They kind of realize that it could happen to me just as I am, without me being like so-and-so or such and such. And so, with that proviso, I'm kind of comfortable having people talk about their stories, as long as it's understood that it's not going to necessarily be that way for somebody else as it was for you. So that's a bit of a long-winded introduction, but we have plenty of time. So how would you like to unfold it? How would you like to unfold it, Paul? I mean, who are you? What do you do? How did you get to be where you are? And what's the essence of what you like to tell people?
Well, first of all, the idea. Can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
The idea of that it happened to me. Obviously, that's
yeah.
It doesn't happen to you, and awakening is happening now. Mm-hmm. It just may not be looking the way you think it should look. But awakening is happening at the moment. Uh-huh. All there is awakening, yeah? Through conscious contact, what's awake in conscious contact?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Through conscious contact, through seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, what's awake in that?
Uh-huh. So in other words, by conscious contact, you mean just the experience of life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's being demonstrated there but an awakeness, yeah?
Right. Of course, the average person in the world, 6 or 7 billion people, are experiencing life and wouldn't necessarily know what the heck you're talking about when you refer to awakening. So what's missing for them?
Well, the thing is, what we call experiencing life is really an interpretation, if you look at it, yeah?
Uh-huh.
See, there's the experience of life, which is conscious contact, and then there's the mental processes interpretation of it as I'm the one who's having conscious contact. Yeah?
Uh-huh.
So that to me isn't an experience. That's an experience in itself, but it's not really what you would call experiencing life. It's called experiencing an interpretation. Yeah. Where most of us are living on a
Excuse me, Paul. Let me pause this for a second. Hang on a second.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so the video is unpaused. So we just paused the video for a second because my cat knocked over the light. that I use to help illuminate this. And Paul says that's what I'm talking about. So let's take that incident as an example of what you're talking about and have you elucidate a little bit.
What was your reaction to that? What was the reaction to that cat knocking over the light?
My reaction was I couldn't pay attention to what you were saying because I had to deal with the light, and so but I want to pay attention to what you're saying in order to interact with you, and so I felt I needed to pause the video to kind of deal with the situation.
Yeah, that's an interpretation, eh?
It's an interpretation, yeah. I mean, I suppose I could have interpreted it differently and just sort of like continued on even though the light was knocked over and the cat was getting in the way.
So what was the experience there? It was more of an interpretation than the cat knocking over the light. The cat knocking over the light was the catalyst, and then the mind did everything else, yeah?
Yeah, but I don't, is there anything wrong with I mean, we interpret things all the time.
Nothing wrong at all. It's just, to me, it's valuable to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because if I'm taking an interpretation to be my experience, or that I'm experiencing something, that's the product of the interpretation, the feeling that it's I experiencing something.
I see.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that, well, let me sort of get at what you're saying. We'll understand it more and more clearly. It seems on the one hand, interpretation is necessary in order to function. I mean, we have to sort of, is it a red light or is it a green light? You know, should I stop or should I go? That we have to interpret what we perceive in order to function in life. But on the other hand, there can be false interpretations. You know, we can sort of understand who we actually are, or what other people are, or what they're saying, or what they're doing, and we cause no end of difficulties for ourselves by falsely interpreting our situations. So so I suppose you're not sort of dismissing the value of interpretation altogether. You're maybe saying interpretation should be ideally more reflective of what the reality is. Is that what you're getting at?
No, I don't think it should be. What I'm putting out is that just see the interpretation that's based on the interpretation, that there's a you having that experience. There's a you that life is happening to. That is what I like to see. The interpretation is fine, but the product of it is there's a sense that it's you that's interpreting. The Y-O-U. To me, that's the basic false interpretation, that there's a you interpreting. I don't care about the interpretations. That's what happens. But the sense of there's a you that's doing it to me is not, that's a little dicey. I don't believe that to be so. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that there's kind of a fundamental error or mistake of the intellect, or whatever you might want to call it, in which we assume or perceive that there's a you doing these things.
Yeah.
And then that fundamental error builds a whole house of cards in which we screw everything up.
Well, the feeling of we screwing everything up would be the product of that thing. Yeah, the sense of there's a me. Let's say if my head is going crazy, driving me crazy, let's say. Mm-hmm. So the sense that there's a you being driven crazy, to me, is the product of that activity called selfing. Not the driving crazy, but the you that's being driven crazy. And I think a lot of times we don't see that level. We see, I'm being driven crazy, and I'd really like to have some relief from that thing that's driving me crazy, but we don't see there's a sense that there's a you being driven crazy. That, I would say, is the dilemma. Yeah. Yeah,
and if you can sort of get over that one, then there's a big weight taken off the shoulders. So.
For sure, and then by the weight being taken off the shoulders, you know you're onto something.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and a lot of teachers are saying something along those lines. You have your own distinctive way of saying it, but you hear that echoed in what a lot of people say, that that this sort of false sense of self that kind of life rotates around is the core problem. Sort of like the old astronomers who thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and they went to great pains to sort of figure out why the planets moved as they did, because it didn't make sense. They'd go in these little loops and everything. Then they finally put the sun at the center. It all got a lot simpler.
See, the thing with this is it can be a true or a false sense of self. It's both of them are bogus to me.
Huh. So is there any sense of self that's not bogus to you?
No.
Huh. So how would you define a true sense of self versus a false sense of self?
As being bogus.
So there's no distinction between them. So why would you call them true and false if they're both bogus?
I didn't. You did.
Oh, I thought you... Oh, I'm sorry.
You said false, therefore I just used this opposite, which is true.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that any sense of self is bogus.
Well, check it out.
So you in your own experience, and of course words limit us because they refer to yous and me's and so on. But you no longer live with a sense of self. Pardon the terminology. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, there's selfing going on, but there's not the sense of being the one that it implies, yeah?
Okay. And
so
when
selfing implies, selfing is like a verb, yeah? Like a mental verb, but it implies a noun, or it's an activity that implies someone that's doing it or the activity is being done to. To me, that's the crux of the matter, not the if it's good selfing or quote bad selfing, but the implied feeling of being the one that it's about or the one that's doing something. Yeah, that implied sense is the product of selfing. Yeah, so it doesn't say it's a thought; it's a sense of self. Yeah, it's a vague feeling that you're a someone, and as soon as that someone becomes the center of the interpretation, then it's called self-centeredness. Yeah, and it's impossible for the mind, while identified as a self, to escape the system of self-centeredness. Self can't get out of self. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
seems to me like a key word in that is identified.
To me, that's the act. That's the verb. To me, selfing is the act of being identified as a self. That's what it is.
That's a good definition. Are you aware that Buckminster Fuller wrote a book called I Seem to Be a Verb?
No.
He did many years ago. And you know who Buckminster Fuller is. He's the guy who designed the geodesic dome and all that. Yeah. I don't think I ever read the book, but it seems like it might be.
What did he say?
I didn't read the book, but it seems like it might be germane to what you're saying here.
What did he say, that he's a verb?
No, he wrote a book, and the title of it was I Seem to Be a Verb.
Yeah. I would drop out the seem and say you are a verb.
Right. And so I've heard you use this term selfing a lot, and I think it bears a little bit of elaboration or repetition because it seems to be the crux of what you teach or say. So let's dwell on that a little bit more. You said it a minute ago in a beautiful nutshell phrase. Maybe you can dredge that up again, but it was sort of, say it again. What do you mean by selfing?
I don't know what I said before.
Okay, well, make up a new one.
Well, selfing to me is an activity of a mental process, yeah? That activity I call selfing, which is the mental process is attempting to produce a sense of being a noun, yeah?
Yeah.
So if you're listening and attentive to that process in a certain relationship with it, which is you're identified as what it's talking about, which is a self, yeah? The selfing implies that there's a self, yes? So when you're thinking about something, you're thinking about something in relation to you, yeah? The something and the you are in like cahoots, yeah? And so let's say people want to get relief from that something they're thinking about, but they want to get relief from it as a you. Those two are joined. The something and the you are joined. It's not you having something bother you. The feeling of you being bothered is the whole scene, yeah?
That's the crux of the problem.
That's the selfing. So to me, to have an opinion about, oh, I wish this would stop bothering me, that's the pronunciation of the interpretation, that there's a me that something's bothering, yeah? So, I mean, while you're proclaiming you're wanting to escape, you're actually reaffirming your seeming imprisonment. That's what I see.
And so
it's done with language, yes? It's done with concepts. The mind in language is almost like hypnotizing itself, yeah? It's taking, it's capturing the reflective quality of mind and having that mind lose itself in what it's reflecting, the sense, which is the selfing. So then in that losing itself and what it's reflecting, it becomes what it's reflecting in a way, yeah? So now I take myself to be a body, yeah? And so this body puts me in a position, yes? It's locatable. I can say, here I am, yeah? I'm here right now in this room, but see, then the mind uses that object and then it fixates it on it somewhere else at some other time, yeah? It just goes into a mental realm about you as a body, because it can't think of you as not a body. So it takes you out of here. So now I'm here sitting, but my mind's thinking about me somewhere else at some other time. What could possibly happen to me somewhere else at some other time? And it's producing physiological effects while I'm sitting here. So I can be flipping out talking to you on a Saturday morning when there's no inherent threat in my room because my head isn't here. For all intents and purposes, it's thinking about next week, and I'm going to be destitute next week.
Yeah, you could be worrying about radiation coming from Japan or something, and getting all keyed up.
Yeah.
So do you think that language is the culprit? That it's the actual way we use language that causes us to misunderstand or misperceive, this whole structure of life? Or do you think that it's more organic than that? In other words, it's somehow hardwired into our makeup that we kind of fall into this delusion, and that we have developed language to just reflect the way we customarily experience life.
I wouldn't care about the answer to that question. I would just see if there seems to be an effect called like irritable, restless, and discontent. And if I can just look at maybe what's causing it, not the reasons why, but seeing, what's the cause of this effect? And then tell the truth about the cause, the effect will change. I don't care why it's happening. All I know is from the absence of that activity, from the punchline not being delivered, that when it's selfing, there's not a sense of being a self. There's a real freedom. And there's an active freedom. It's like freedom-ing. It's not a freedom as if it's something that occurred and now it's had, but it's an activity of mind now. It's freed from that bondage of being a self, yeah?
Yeah. Freed. Yeah. I think freed from that bondage is a key phrase.
Yeah.
So when you're giving meetings and having little songs with people and stuff, how do you help them, kind of shift in their orientation, to sort of actually live what you're talking about, as opposed to just sort of listening to your words and having it be a nice concept? How do you actually affect some kind of a alteration in the way they operate?
By not having any intention to do that.
But then somehow it does get done in some cases.
Something happens, yes.
It does happen with people.
It seems to, yes.
Somehow just listening to you sort of subtly kind of alters their perspective or something.
Well, it's sort of like, let's say the mind is in a mental yogic posture, yeah? So I would call it self-centeredness. So it's sort of in this sort of twisted position, so whatever it receives is sort of is based on how it holds it. So it's in a twisted selfing type of way. If you can just entertain this possibility, in the reaching, when the mind reaches for this possibility, it brings it out of that mental yogic posture. And then there's a sense of presence, and people can feel it. It's obvious, yeah.
Yeah. And do you find that in some cases, at least, it sort of matures out of being just a sort of a thing that they experience on Saturday mornings or whenever they meet with you, into something that abides? Yeah. So initially it may be sporadic, and eventually it kind of stabilizes for a lot of people.
Here, this is a place of time and space, so it translates as if it deepens. Yeah. It can do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it anyway. That's how it looks for people. I have a belief in, not a belief, I'd say, but in this whole, like I'm a mailman, yeah? So in a way, I'm just inviting people. But
are you literally a mailman, or are you just saying?
No.
Not a bad job, actually. No. But you're saying that metaphorically you're a mailman.
Yeah. I'm just inviting them. Yeah, I'm not doing anything other than that. So, but I found that repetition is helpful.
I think so too. I mean, I listen to a lot of this stuff, and sometimes I think it's just the way my brain works, but it helps me to hear even the very same point multiple times, because I kind of settle into deeper and deeper appreciation of it.
Or your mind is in a different posture when it hears it. So there's like it can sort of quote unquote get it a little in a different light at a certain time.
Yeah. And the receptivity progressively grows. You just kind of, okay, I got it to that degree, and now I see there's a deeper value to this. It just sort of matures.
As long as the I know doesn't come in. See, if the I know comes in, it's neutered. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of makes a flowing thing static.
Yes.
It's like as if it were something you could kind of grasp and hold on to.
Oh, you know it now. It's dead.
Yeah.
You're not going to find out anything about it. You know it. That's the dilemma.
That's a good point. I mean, I kind of like this idea of uncertainty and ambiguity, where there's never sort of a final kind of absolute got it. Now I can just rest on my laurels, but always this. I mean, always this sort of like, well, do we ultimately really know anything for certain? That to me is a much more comforting place than the sort of gripping on to some certainty.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. True security here is insecurity.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a real paradox, but I really think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So if you don't mind, let's kind of, I know this is like your story, and a lot of people don't like to talk about their stories, but if you don't mind, we'll take the opportunity to let the dog in, and then talk a bit about your story, so to speak. I mean, you've spoken about recovery and so on in your talks, and how did you kind of come along? I mean, you were obviously in a period where you were suffering from addiction. You've spoken about that. How did you get into that? How did you get out of that first? And how did you, originally get inspired by the whole spiritual thing as opposed to just sort of, Yeah.
Let's see. Well, when I share my story in recovery, I always say my golden years were between 2 and 4, because and everything went downhill from there.
I think a lot of people could say that.
So in my life experience, in the story of the action figure, I have a very deep, like, contextual memory of what it was like when I was young. And when I was young, when I was playing, I wasn't thinking, will I be playing next week? Because I had no idea of time yet. And I didn't walk around my house and see, I should have a bigger room, and my mother should look a lot nicer than she does. None of that was going on. And, I'd be playing with ants, and that's all that was going on, playing with ants. And there was an immediacy and spontaneity that was so present that there wasn't any observation of it being special. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
most kids have that, I'd say.
I believe so. That's why you really like when you see a baby and stuff.
Yeah, so, a lot of innocence.
Yeah, so I have a remembrance of that somehow. And
I used to play with ants too. I used to pour sugar on the kitchen floor and watch them, make little trails for them to follow.
Yeah. I used to have wars between red and black by putting a cube of sugar on near a curb where I used to live, and then seeing which army was stronger. And the reds used to kill the blacks easier than the blacks. It took 2 blacks to kill 1 red. It took 1 red to kill a black. So yeah, I'd be there for days watching this little like Roman Empire-ish thing, two things, watching it. So yeah, but there was a sense of something that wasn't made valuable. It was just the way it was, and yet there was then a growing out of it, it seemed. And then I got very caught up in the thought stream, and this idea of who I was. I didn't have a strong sense of who I was, so there was a very feeling of discomfort there, and it just grew and grew. So
I mean, as you're getting into your teens and so
on.
on.
Yeah. So, I remember one time I went to school one day. I was 11 years old, and a girl went home, and a girl said hello to me in the hallway, and I went home and wondered what she meant by it for about 5 hours. That's what I'm talking about. That's what started to come up, and it became just overbearing. So I wanted relief, and I found it by drinking. Yeah. So when I drank, see, what I call alcoholism is that obsession, and actually now I believe it's an identification as self, but at that point I was suffering from the obsession with self, and I needed relief, and my first solution to that was alcohol, which actually just furthered the bondage to the idea of being a self. And then I went in, I became an addict. I just, my life took a bad turn. And as soon as I started to use, I found out I had a magnetic appeal to people in uniform. As soon as I started to use, I started getting arrested a lot, and I started having a lot of consequences.
Yeah.
And I found that
using what? Cocaine, you mean?
Well, everything. But I used basically everything. A lot of hallucinogens at first, and then I got into the narcotics as I got older. And I used it intravenously too. So
I have a similar story, but unfortunately mine was compacted into a 1-year period.
Oh yeah, that's good.
I also had a couple experiences with the men in uniform, but somehow after about a year of it, I was out of there.
No, I sort of had it was going to be a long little wrestling match. So
yeah,
and that's what happened. And then I got to be 36 years old, which was an amazing event in itself.
Yeah, congratulations on making it that far.
Yeah, and then I finally I had spent 2 years in a drug and alcohol program, 85 to 87. To try to become civilized, really. I was like a wild dog, and they didn't have what I was looking for. I didn't know what it was, but I realized they didn't have it. So I left there. I graduated from there, and I went back to drugs and alcohol again for 10 months. And then I washed up on the shores of AA in 1988, March 21st, and then I've been sober and clean ever since.
Good.
So what happened is that became the basis. I mean, in my life, whatever books I read or scriptures or anything like that, the thing that really delivered the goods was recovery. Yeah, and that book I identified with every problem it described perfectly, and now I've experienced every solution they talk about. So it's the most living book that I've ever met here.
What book are you talking about?
The Book of Recovery, the AA Big Book, it's called.
Oh, it's an actual book that they call that.
Yeah. That whole program's based out of the first 164 pages of that book. So that became the platform or the basis of a life that in other words, it dealt with the functioning. I couldn't function here.
I understand that AA is really a very spiritual program from what I've heard about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty cosmic. I mean, they have these principles that go really deep.
Exactly. So my life has been based on those principles. I'm talking about the action figure life. And then my life now, for all intents and purposes, from outside would look like it's quite manageable. Where, in fact, how that occurs is I admit that I'm not managerial quality. Yeah, I can't run a life. And so that was a very big principle in recovery for me. I had spent 2 years in this program, and when I left there, I didn't really like the people there or the president or much or the program, but I had to admit my life looked better with them running it than it ever did with me running it. So I got a sense of what the whole principle of recovery is, which is turning one's will and life over to the care of something greater than self. Now, it was years later in the program when this information that I was receiving started really having a big effect out here in the translation. And that was because self is a very important word in recovery. They use it quite a lot in the book. And there's this one statement in it. You want me to go into this?
Sure, yeah. No, this is interesting. Yeah, this is good stuff.
Right. So there was this one statement in there. And so after some of these, let's say, shifts were occurring, you would see them in a reflection by how they translated, basically. Yeah, like Jesus says, you'll know the tree by its fruits. Yeah.
Right.
So I was involved in doing workshops in recovery
for other addicts.
About doing how to do the steps of the AA program, which is a program of recovery from alcoholism, and it's a quote unquote spiritual program. So I would be speaking out of this big book, this AA book, and then I would run into the word self, and I saw it in a whole new light, and I got all these new downloads about it. But the basic idea of it was that it was a foreign installment, so to speak. It was sort of like more a parasitical process of a mental process. In other words, its quality is parasitical. It sort of takes a life and makes it its life, yeah?
And even AA had that spin on it, or just that was your take on it?
Yeah. This is so. The AA spin was that the root of the problem is obsession with self, and what I did is I just looked at it a little bit different, and I said, no, I don't think that's the case. It's identification as self, and that's a huge difference because if you're fighting self as something other than you, even if you win, you lose. Yeah, you have to see it's not you. To me, and when that happened, when that was broken, then I knew it by its fruits, because I had a radical relief. Yeah, a radical relief from the bondage of self, which has spanned many years now. So,
was it a radical relief that happened just like in a moment, like Thursday the 14th at 8 p.m. bingo, or more it evolved into it?
I had things like that, but those things didn't really do it. It was more like a leaking through a canvas.
Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, it just leaked through what I was calling myself, and then what my mind was calling myself, and then that what was leaking through undermined mind's idea of what it was calling me. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And so it wasn't like, it was more of a collapse, not something else. In other words, the floor eroded and it dropped.
Yeah.
Off.
They say in Zen that sometimes awakening sneaks up on you like a thief in the night.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And so then I was doing these workshops, but they shifted dramatically. And they never shifted back. I stopped doing the nuts and bolts of things, and I was just speaking about the recognizing what you're not. Because if you can see it as not you, the next thing the mind can do is entertain being free of it. If you see it as you, the best you can do is get therapy for it, do modalities, practices, which I have I have opinions about them, but you get into this doing and having to try to fix something. But if it's not you, that whole drive of seeking can be abandoned, and then there's a living as if there's found. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Found. Yeah. So that's what sort of is occurring. It's not like it occurred because it's a verb. It just it's occurring.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
There's just a perpetual living as having found.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say, well, maybe we're getting ahead of the story a little bit, but this is a theme that comes up in a lot of these interviews, where I sort of, in my own experience, feel like that the kind of living as having found can actually paradoxically coexist with the notion that there's still, progress, or if you like that word, yet to be made, or evolution or growth or whatever. It's sort of like, we haven't necessarily reached the pinnacle of human evolution or spiritual possibility just because we've shifted into a sense of contentment and non-attachment to self. There's, can you relate to that? I mean, since you had this sort of shift, gradual as it may have been, do you feel like the Paul Hedderman of 2011 is wiser or somehow a better mouthpiece for this truth than the Paul Hedderman of 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, you mean Paul Hedderman's like the musical instrument, the action figure?
Yeah, the action figure, sort of.
I would say the action figure has gotten, by having that note blown through it a lot, it's gotten a little more timbre in it. Yes.
Yeah, good way to put it.
But I don't see. The space has nothing to do with this place.
Right.
This is just a translation of that space. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a line from the Incredible String Band. There was an old group in the 60s that I sometimes like to quote, light that is one, though the lamps be many.
Yeah.
Or you could take the analogy of electricity. I mean, you have the same electrical field, and you can plug all kinds of contraptions into it, different intensities of light bulbs, for instance. And maybe as the action figure, as you like to use that term, we can go, really mixing metaphors here, but you can go from a 10-watt bulb to a 20-watt bulb to a 50-watt bulb to a 1,000-watt bulb over the course of a lifetime. But you're not identifying with the bulb. It's more like you are the field.
That's right. See, it's sort of like the wiring of the action figure can be rewired to handle more juice. Yeah. But it's not quantifying the juice.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you even find perhaps that, since you've kind of found yourself in this position of being a teacher, that...
No, I'm not a teacher. Remember.
Okay, what would you like to call yourself?
I'm just an inviter.
Okay, since you're
not inviter.
Inviter. Since you're a fairly involved inviter, with a website and giving satsangs and all that stuff, do you find that it's almost as though the juice has begun to flow with greater volume. It's sort of like, okay, if you're going to play this role, here kid, we'll give you some more juice to play with.
I found that in I don't know, this is just an interpretation of it, but
yeah,
I found like when there's been an intimation of that juice in my life, I've been usually willing to open up to it.
Yeah.
So I find the whole point is, if there's the willingness, the energy will come, so to speak. Yeah, if you will.
Yeah, like that old movie with Kevin Costner about baseball. If you build it, they will come. Remember that?
Yeah. So like I found in my, like when I first started doing things in recovery, I didn't even want to do it. Someone just said, I think you'd be good at this. So I started doing it, and all I did was show up. And I batted 1,000 because I actually never showed up. I just had something that maybe people have a difficulty getting into that posture. That posture comes easy for me. I just sort of let go. Yeah, sure. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying at the beginning of the interview. It seems like you have a gift for just expounding what you expound, and it comes easily, and it's good. It's great.
Yeah. So it gets to be used.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit. So you went through recovery, and you kind of underwent this shift from an attachment to or an identification with individual bound self to a much more relaxed, free kind of condition. And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, the thing, all there was the seeing that I was not that. There was nothing else that was done.
Right. But somehow that was seen. Somehow you saw that.
Yeah.
It was seen. Okay. But I think I also heard you allude in your audios that I listened to having, gotten involved in some practices, like you meditated, you went to some songs.
Yeah.
What sort of things did you do along the way?
Well, when I was young, I was with a guru from India when I was about 18 to about 22.
Who's that?
And actually, a guy named Guru Maharaji.
I know.
He was a young kid at that time.
The 14-year-old perfect dude.
Yeah. See, that was a really weird situation for me because, he was the Lord of the universe.
Right.
And there I was, and so he was the Lord of the universe. I don't like the Lord of the universe. What does that make me? It's a very painful relationship.
Yeah.
I meditated. I like the meditation and everything. And it's funny, I got run over by a car twice in one night, yeah?
Whoa.
I was in the hospital for a long time, and I saw him quite a lot in some realm.
Huh.
I saw tons of videos of his that were never made. I was
just in your mind's eye.
It was just on and on and on.
Did you get run over by the same car twice or two different cars?
Yeah, I got run over by the same car twice in one night. The guy hit me, didn't know what he hit, and he backed up over me.
Oh, jeez. Just wanted to make sure.
Yes. It told me a lot, just that experience.
Yeah. So obviously the Guru Maharaji thing didn't.
Well, I did a lot of meditation and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I looked into Zen and stuff, but then I went back to drinking and using pretty, ferociously for years. And then when I got recovered, when I started getting sober, after a couple of years, I went back to the things I thought had worked in my life, which was meditation, and I used to do massage and polarity therapy, Tai Chi, Qi Kung. So I tried to do that again. And so I got interested in that, and I started traveling to Asia, did some retreats in Thailand, did some retreats here, went to Zen Center, meditated, had a nun I used to see every, once or twice a year. She'd give me an idea of how I was doing and have like a little interview with her. And
is she the one who was Adyashanti's teacher by any chance?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Because I know his Zen teacher was a woman also.
No, she wasn't a teacher. I would just go in and see her twice a year, and she would just tell me how I was doing, by listening to me, whatever.
Well, you're kind of mentioning all those things in a sort of a cavalier way, as though that was all just sort of entertainment and didn't actually have any value for you. Is that true, or was it?
That's your interpretation, bro.
Okay, I just kind of. But am I wrong? I mean, or did you feel like, okay, this was actually somehow instrumental in bringing me to where I am now, or something? excuse the use of the word me.
You'd have to, where am I now? That's the thing. But say on that level of action figure, no, I have, it was, what I really liked about it was you couldn't really quantify it, but it was a sincere desire, let's say.
Yeah.
Focused. Yeah. And I was doing the best I could, but what I found over years later was there was a certain template going on I wasn't aware of, which was the sense of being the one that was doing and having. And that was the fraudulent aspect of it all. So no matter how much effort I seemingly did, no matter how much sincerity was conjured up, it was totally defined by the system I was moving in. Yeah?
Yeah.
Coming from a doer and a haver. And I saw that system fails. And therefore, when I saw that in its naked light, that personally or impersonally, it fails for me, then there was a dropping of it, yeah.
Well, there's that old saying, it takes a thorn to remove a thorn. And, there's another saying where a man standing in the middle of a mud puddle, let's say it's a big one, and somebody's out on the edge, and the man says, how do I get out of this mud puddle? And the guy on the edge says, well, take a step. And he said, well, wait a minute, you're asking me to put my foot in the mud again. And yeah, but you do that, and you do that enough times, and you'll come to the edge of the mud puddle, and you'll be out. So, to throw in one more saying, there's a Zen saying that, enlightenment may be an accident, but spiritual practice makes you accident prone. So, and finally, one more. I mean, you're taking a boat across the river, let's say, and you get to the other shore. It's time to get out of the boat. It's not that the boat was worthless, but it's no longer relevant,
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, the funny thing is, you were the same space was on the other shore you left.
True. In this case, I mean, metaphors have their limitations. But I have a bias, maybe I'll drop it at some point.
I know.
Yeah, which is just that, although there may not be any ultimate value to spiritual practices, they serve a purpose at the stage at which one is inclined to do them, And it's hard to say what if, but it could very well be that, those things you did were instrumental in getting you to the point where you no longer needed to do them, and they no longer seemed relevant, and the whole notion of an I doing some kind of practice seemed ludicrous. What do you think? Yeah. And the only reason I emphasize that is that a lot of people, they'll do some kind of spiritual practice for 20 years, and then they'll have this realization, and then they'll tell everybody you don't need to do spiritual practices, because from that perspective they seem superfluous, but at the stage at which the people they're speaking to are at, they might be useful.
Well, the thing is, if you feel like you need to do it, you better do it.
Yeah, do it. Whatever.
Yeah.
And
if you don't feel like you need to do it, then don't
do it. Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you feel like you need to do it, and you're trying to use a philosophy to give you permission not to do it, you're going to be in the mental vice of selfing. See? Because there's a sense that you really need to do something, but now you're trying to overlay this idea, but there's no one to do, or there's no need to do anything. That doesn't work.
Very good point. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
That doesn't work. That's the subtle doing of non-doing.
Yeah, and it can become a trap, I think.
It's laid by the mind, and it walks right in. Yeah. So no, I have no idea what's going on here. All I know, it's not going on to anybody. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm on a need to know basis. I'm like, my whole idea is I don't know much. I find out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in Zen, they say the highest form of mind is I don't know. As soon as you're if the state of I don't know is active, then your experience here is finding out. That's what it translates to here. I don't know translates into finding out here. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so I like that way of living. And the idea of thinking I know that this had an effect or doesn't is all basically in that same box of interpretation. So I don't care about knowing. Whatever happened, in a sense, has no relevance because it's not happening now.
Yeah. And it's all theory. I mean, who knows? Yeah. It's all theoretical. But as long as one doesn't make a sort of an I know stance about the not knowing business, you can take anything and turn it into an absolute.
That's right. Well, that's what the mind likes to do. Yes, it wants to know. It has a drive to know, and it doesn't. So it wants certainty when true certainty is being uncertain.
Yep.
It wants to have a sense of knowing, but it doesn't realize knowing neuters the activity of finding out, because you're gonna try to find out to something that reinforces the idea that you knew. It's all contrived. It's all set up.
Yeah.
See, but when that thing is short-circuited, and to me, the short-circuiting point is at the point of the identification as, yeah, not the content of that, not trying to partition the good and the bad content to see how it has affected me, but the me that is the center of all that dualistic interpretation. It's the false center. Yeah.
I heard a phrase that I thought was really clever. Someone said, the bad news is you're in free fall forever. The good news is there's no ground.
Yes, yeah.
You're not going to go splat at some point. It's
well,
just
that's
like
the thing. If you're falling, let's say, or you're in uncertainty, the mind is like hands trying to grasp, yes?
Yeah.
Grasp something. If it gets exhausted, when the hands stop handing, what's found out? Their wings, so to speak.
Yeah, good point.
As soon as the hands stop grasping or handing, then they appear to be wings. And so the whole point, your whole solution was not through the handing, but this exhaustion of the handing. Then the wings appear, yeah? They were always there, but they were being used as hands. So that's the whole point. When the handing is dropped, and I find, well, listen, even before the handing is dropped, if there's no one that's doing it, that's the dropping of the handing in a whole different way. It doesn't mean the handing has to stop, but it's still been dropped, yeah? So selfing is going on, but it's not implying a self, yeah?
There's like the action figure that you refer to that's doing its action figure thing, but that's not really that's not that's not the identity that.
No, let's say, so here's the selfing going on, yeah? The whole thing is there's a part of the selfing which is the feeling of being the self or the noun, yeah? If that is just a verb, it's not a noun, yeah? If you see the whole selfing as a verb, then there's the freedom. If part of the selfing appears to be a noun, then there's the bondage. That's the activity of being bonded from moment to moment or free from moment to moment. Yeah.
And do you feel like it's a black and white on-off situation, or there can be degrees of it? In other words,
there's tons of degrees of it.
Yeah, many gradations, right?
Yes. That's like from the iron chain to the gold chain of bondage to self. So there can be really stark, cold iron, and then it can be really glistening, very radiant gold. But they're all different degrees in between, but it's all the activity of being bonded to a self. Yeah.
And do you find in your own case that, that you have little discoveries every now and then where there's some residual bondage that you hadn't even been aware of that gets released and a sort of a new level of freedom dawns? Or do you feel like there are no sort of unfoldments like that anymore?
Well, there's spikes and downloads, but the basic space is always
there.
Yes, it's sort of like like gravity, let's say, with people. Have you ever gone into a cafe and have you heard people talking about the effects of gravity?
Not that I can recall.
That's right. Yeah,
I've had both examples. I've gone into cafes and I've heard talks about gravity, but I don't know about the two together.
Yes. See, so very rarely they don't sense the effect of gravity on the body because
it's just taken for granted.
Well, it's always happening. Yeah, they would only know it by its absence. So if they were put in an anti-gravity thing, then they would know, wow, that was gravity. Yeah. So in the same way, in a way, there's a sense. It's by the absence of self is the presence. Yeah. When there's the absence of self, that's the presence, and then you know the absence of self by the presence. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I understand what you're saying, it's sort of like you can be sort of gripped by an identification with self without even knowing it, and then when that grip releases, then in its absence, you notice, whoa, this is.
Well, you get a sense of what it is when it's clearly not.
Yeah, yeah, and you didn't, and you didn't realize the extent to which you had been gripped by it, and then, but no longer gripped by it. There's like this, contrast.
See, you learn about it when you're not it.
Yeah, good point.
You never learn about it when you're it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so when see, like in recovery, we say self-knowledge avails you nothing. So the more and more knowledge you gain about self as a self, it's not going to avail you anything because it's not going to lead to freedom from self. Yeah? Because the whole move of selfing is the claim. Yeah. So instead of like seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, it's I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm feeling, I'm tasting, I'm touching. Instead of body, my body. Instead of time, my time. So you just put a word up on a board, sex, money, and health, and everyone would have a meaning about that, based on their condition, let's say, of money, sex, and health. But then just add one little word in front of it, and you'll change the weight of it. My money, my sex, my health, totally different weight. That's the difference between travel heavy and travel light here. The my.
Yeah, good point.
The my is the act of being identified.
Do you find that in certain circumstances, let's say you stub your toe or something, you have a lot of pain, or a cop pulls you over for a traffic violation or something, do you find that there's sort of a reemergence of a sense of self?
Sure. No, not a sense of self, just physical reaction, contraction.
Physical reaction, okay.
Yes, contraction and mind. But mind isn't self. It's part of the body here, so it contracts. It's reliving something. That's all it does.
So in the midst of a kind of a traumatic experience like that, I don't know how you want to put it, but the sense of the non-self, the freedom, the presence doesn't get compromised or diminished?
I'll tell you the truth, I would say in my own life, particularly in the past, the greatest moments was in an extreme traumatic situation. Like when I've almost died. Back then, when I almost died, that was the brightest it's ever been. Because
Why is
there was no selfing going on. Because the selfing is being produced by the system, the body, yes, the mind. And so when let's say I hit my head on the bottom surfing, and my whole nervous system shut down. I almost got paralyzed. There was no selfing going on. I mean, let's say there's a traveling of not being a self, but at that point there was no selfing whatsoever. The verb of selfing stopped. It got startled into stopping completely. Yeah.
Interesting.
So everything was bright as can be. Yeah, and there was no fear and no anxiety being provoked because there was no narration of the event. Then the mind shows up again. It comes out of its startled condition, comes out of the pause, and then claims what's ever happening. Yes, you notice it? Take an epiphany. You ever have an epiphany?
I think so, if I understand.
Did you ever make a reservation for it? Do you make a reservation for epiphany? Did you call up ahead and ask for Kenny G music? Like this? Did you? No.
It just happened.
It just happens. But when it usually, quote unquote, comes to an end, it's usually happens when the mind rises and goes, oh, I just had this incredible experience, this epiphany. As soon as the selfing claims it, it's it. It's new.
Yeah, it's true. The mind rushes in and kind of takes ownership.
That's it. That's the selfing. So that happens at a big event, and it will claim its own absence. Self. Yes? So it will take its own absence and make it into a spiritual experience it had. It's like, see, like they say, a thief in the night. This is a thief in the day and night. That's all it does is claim. It claims life as its own. Yeah.
So I think this is going well. I think people are going to enjoy this talk. Do you still work with people in recovery, or do you just work with people in general these days?
No, I work with some people in recovery too.
Specifically,
yeah.
Okay. And are you able to sort of apply the kind of things you've been talking about here to their situation and offer something a little bit, unlike what they're generally being offered?
You'd have to ask them. Yeah.
But this is your approach, I mean, right? You just,
yeah. Well, no, if someone says their house is on fire, I'll talk to them about a pail of water. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't. You have to. You ever hear of the Course in Miracles?
Sure. Yeah.
I did a lot of Course in Miracles at one time,
Uh-huh.
and they talk about this place here, this appearance, as many different levels. Yeah. So, and there are solutions on each level. So let's say if you really believe your house is on fire, then that solution would be a pail of water. Yeah?
Right.
It wouldn't be that there is no fire and there is no house and there is no water, would it?
Yeah,
No.
that wouldn't be very practical.
It
no.
probably wouldn't. So that's the point. So a lot of times people, when they share, you can hear the format they're seemingly in. Yeah. So then you have to sort of take that into consideration.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm glad to hear you say that. It's sort of like you kind of teach at the level of the listener whatever's appropriate for them.
Yeah.
And I think that in many cases is not done these days. People do say there is no fire, there is no water to someone whose house is on fire, and it's really not that helpful to them. So, it's...
Well, we don't know that. It could be in time, but I sometimes a rigidity sets in. Yeah. There's a subtle thing of being right and or whatever, and then that causes you to be rigid in how where you stand with this. To me, this is a lot more malleable, and it's sloppy and dirty. There's, to me, in like Advaita, there's like Advaita Pharisees. Yeah, they've got the letter of the whole quote unquote message, but then there's no spirit in it.
Advaita fundamentalists, you might say.
Yeah. So I don't, to me, it's a living, moving activity. Yeah, it's verbing constantly, and
No, that's good. I really appreciate that. How'd you come up with the term Zen Bitch-Slap for your website?
Zen Bitch-Slap. Well, it was a joke on an old Zen koan. You know the koans, you do, but I don't know.
Which one is that?
What's the famous one of what's
the
one hand
clapping?
Clapping. So
okay.
It's what's the sound of one hand slapping? It's a Zen Bitch-Slap. And it also implies that, selfing is a verb and it can be startled. Yeah. So selfing stops quite a lot. And so the trance that you may be in by being attentive to it as awareness, consciousness, that trance can be broken because the selfing breaks. So there's what you would call maybe a pause. Yeah. So in that pause, the sense of what's being implied to be you stops, but something continues, and it can be a really valuable moment. Yes, when there's a sense of what you were taking yourself to be has stopped, but there's something that's still continuing. Yeah. So
like you were saying earlier, when you hit your head on the bottom surfing, it's sort of like the shock of that situation kind of knocked you out of your ordinary,
Well, the thing is, you as representing a mental interpretation is never going to get it. There's no way. In an extreme situation, you are not going to be cool, calm, and collected, the you. It's usually absent in an extreme situation. You know what I mean? And the thing is, it's like, I always like to joke with this one. Let's just say in some Buddhist things, they say your whole life is really based on the moment of death. Yeah, that's the whole point of living, is to be prepared for that moment when the body dies. So let's say in your life you've been listening to your head all day, every day. So you notice, like, some people, they'll go to work and then around 9 o'clock at night their mind will tell them they had a bad day. Like they were there the whole day, but they had, you would imagine they would be aware that it was bad when it was badding, but now the mind, you've had a bad day, and you just go, oh yeah, I've had a bad day, and you call other people. Did you have a bad day? Yeah, I thought so. I had a bad day. So let's say you've been listening to that head, and it's a mental process, yeah? So it takes time. It takes time. So conscious contact is a timeless event, basically, and the interpretation of the conscious contact as I'm the one who's seeing takes time. Yeah?
Yeah.
Conscious contact's timeless, but the interpretation of that event takes time. So let's say you've been displaced from being aware of the conscious contact, and now you're just aware of the interpretation. So every day you're living, and the mind's telling you what happened, but what it's telling you is about a moment that's already passed. Yeah.
Right.
So the moment that you're in right now is being used to interpret the previous moment. And so on and so forth. So, okay, so now you're living as this interpretation. Then the moment of death occurs, And that when that death occurs, the body shuts down. And yet you are waiting for the next moment for your head to tell you what happened. Yeah? So you're never going to be aware of your own death in selfing. The only one who's going to know you died is somebody else. Yeah? You're never going to know you died because you're on a time lag. You know, the idea of you.
I see. So you're always interpreting retroactively, and you're not going to be in a position to interpret after you've died.
Exactly. And so when you have a big traumatic event, it just startles the whole system. So there's no interpretation of that event for a period of time. Then it comes back. Yeah.
Kind of shuts off the interpreter.
Shuts it off. Yet something continues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there I am, and then that moment of death is like my friend says that I'm never going to experience my own death. My death is only experienced by others. Yeah. Yeah. Because with that time lag, that moment's going to pass, and there's not going to be a voiceover. There's no you. There's no you that's going to stand over your dead body and go, oh, you're dead now. There isn't a you. It's like a voice box of the apparatus, the narrator.
And so the practical implication of what you're saying now is what? How do we get onto this track here?
No, just see that's the case. If you see the activity that's presenting a you, then there's a sense you're not that. That's what you are, is the seeing of what you're not, in my experience. My daily experience is I am the seeing of what I'm not. Yeah, that's what I am. That seeing is what I am. The seeing of what I'm not is what I am, because all I can see here is what I'm not. Yeah?
So, do you ever have some people talk of an evolution of one's, consciousness or development or whatever, to the point where when you see the world, you actually don't see it as what you're not. It's sort of, you enter a unitive phase where you begin to see everything in terms of the self, not the individual self, but the sort of like the universal self. You begin to see the universal essence, which you already have known yourself to be. Again, pardon the terminology. That begins to expand out and encompass the whole environment as well. Do you have any flavor of that in your own life?
I don't see you can see your essence. Your essence
not as an object, but there's a sort of an
intimation?
An intimation or an intuition or a knowing of the essential nature of the object as being the same as the essential nature of oneself, what one has known oneself to be since awakening.
A sense of emptiness, yeah. But that's not how my apparatus sees things as things, but there's a sense of what, I don't know if you want to use emptiness, that's a concept, but there's a sense of I don't know what.
As if the emptiness kind of permeates everything. It's not just some abstract
I don't even want to go there with that emptiness, because that's a word, I don't know what's going on. Let's put it that way. But I don't have any interest in knowing what's going on. I really don't.
Well, you do and you don't. I mean,
I have an interest
devote
in
your
what's
life
not going on.
Okay.
I have a great interest in what's not going on, but I have absolutely no interest in what's going on. Because when I know what's not going on, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
That's how it works for me. I'm sorry to say it that way. But
what I'm suggesting is that the what's not going on is also, is the inherent nature of everything that appears to be going on, such that, with that perspective, nothing ever happened, even on an objective level.
That's right, yes. That's a strong sense. Nothing
ever. It is. It's a sense. It's not like a sort of, and it's not like you don't see cars driving down the street and birds flying around. But there's a sort of but that is all sort of permeated with a sense that even though that's happening, at the same time it's not happening. There's a kind of a paradox there.
Yeah. That's just like demonstrations of traveling lighter. Yeah. You get demonstrations of it. To me, it's an intimation. You can't put a finger on it, and then there's no desire to put a finger on it. There's just it's just that, me going like this. That's the best I can do about it, really. There's just it's sort of like a calling. You almost hear it and you sense it, everything, but that's where it goes. That's its level of appearance, is non-appearance in a way.
Right.
It's nice. I like it.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the Course in Miracles thing, because it reminded me that when I mentioned that you were going to be on this show, someone said, oh, I hope he talks a little bit about his Course in Miracles thing. I mean, is there anything more that's worth saying about that in terms of
I loved the Course in Miracles. I mean, as it was one of the, in the action figure story, it was a radical fun.
Good.
I mean, I just laughed more. I laughed like a lot when when people were reading the Course with me, or I was at certain events. It was just a giant laugh fest because it's just hilarious. It was just hilarious, the relief of seeing the structure of what I'm not, you know. It was incredible. The structure is a moving structure, you see. It's not like you moved into a house called what you're not. It's a verb. It's an activity. So, but to have it so clearly drawn as if it appeared to be a stagnant structure you could look at and sort of understand, that's an incredible act here. And that act was performed through the Course in Miracles in me. Yeah.
So you're saying that the Course in Miracles does that? It sort of builds a static edifice of, you know, that which is not, or
no. It brings it produces, let's say, the selfing, which is a verb. It structures it so clearly and cleanly it can appear to be a noun to you, so that you can study it. Yes. It's difficult to study a verb, but that's what, for me, the Course was, personally. Or impersonally, it took what was an activity called selfing and it drew it very clearly and laid it there for me to look at whenever I wanted to. In other words, it wasn't like I had to go out into the fields and see if the birds flew by and landed to watch bird watching. It was like, hey, this is it. This is the structure of this. This is how this place is produced. This is what mind is doing. This is what the lessons do. They'll change your perceptions. And in that shift of perceptions, you realize the perceptions you had were fucking structured. They're artificial. They're not organic. They're contrived. They're a structured system. And I would say that system is self-centeredness. It's like putting on a helmet. And so they describe the contours of the helmet, how it's like to live in the helmet, and what it's like if you take the helmet off. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Is there any, I know you're a little bit pressed for time because you have to go and do a lecture, so we'll wrap it up in a couple minutes, but is there anything else that you feel like is, you know, really worth mentioning that we haven't touched upon here? Either in terms of various things you've been through or things you like to say to people that we haven't really said, or do you feel like we've pretty well covered it here for now? You're at a loss for words. I've never seen you at a loss for words.
No, well, the point is, it's an invitation. So the invitation is really based on the other end of it, what's receiving the invitation. So I'm sure this will do its thing.
Yeah.
I sense it. Yeah, we could go on and on. There's a lot to delve into, but it's all about, for me, describing what I'm not. Yeah. And with the sense of, if I share that with others, they may see what was being taken to be them as what they're not. And it sort of translates as a traveling lighter, which is, you know, if this place is a translation, and it's dualistically contrived, so there's either you're traveling heavy or you're traveling light, and then there's tons of degrees in between. If you had a preference, I would rather travel light. Yeah. And so what I found is, like, the thing that's causing it to seem so heavy is what wants it to be light. Yeah. If you can just give up that, then it tends to get exactly what it wanted by not being there. Yeah.
It's interesting. You keep talking about, you know, that which is not and that which I'm not. It's the word Maya actually means that which is not. It means which not.
Oh, yeah?
And so it's kind of cool because, I mean, that's kind of like the essence of what you've been saying. And this whole, you know, the word Maya, which is usually translated as illusion, really means that it's not what it appears to be.
Yes. So, yeah, I like it that way. It works that way.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I understand you might be coming to Fairfield next fall or something. My friend Radhika has been really rooting for you. So I'll get
have
to
a
meet
lot
you.
of people on my payroll.
Yeah,
I
get to meet you when you come here.
Yeah, I hope so. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
What happens when if they invite me, I'll come.
I think they're intending to. Radhika was talking about, I don't know, September, October, something like that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Good.
I have a good feeling about Fairfield.
It's a fun place.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, be good to have you out here.
So I'll forget about it as soon as I get off the phone with you. But I'll be.
My wife says it's a fun place unless you have to live here. Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence.
That's right. Well, I'm not planning on moving to Fairfield, but you never.
Yeah.
Have any water around? I need water.
Few little reservoirs and ponds and things like that.
I need sort of water with agitation in it.
Yeah, not much of that. You can get into windsurfing, or if you drive an hour and a half, but that's about the extent of it.
No, I think I'll probably be here. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, thanks. And
thank you, Paul.
It's out good, and let me know.
Yeah, let me just conclude by telling people that you've been watching Paul Hedderman interviewed on Buddha at the Gas Pump, and there have been about 60 such interviews so far. You can see them all archived at batgap.com, BATGAP, and you'll find links there to a podcast, to a YouTube channel, an RSS feed if you want to subscribe in your blog, and you can also sign up for an email newsletter to be notified when new interviews are posted, as they are just about every week. So thanks a lot, Paul, and I'll see you when you come to Fairfield.
Yeah, take care of yourself.